You've described yourself as, in the early days, as an amateur filmmaker. Why?
Oh, partly because I've never had proper training, and although I teach at the film school, I've never actually benefited from the same luxury when I was young. But also because I've made a virtue out of being incompetent. You know, I sort of engage with a story subject and then kind of throw everything up in the air and try and kind of reassemble it in as best I can, and ignoring, up to a point, ignoring the rules and regulations of the craft. And it's partly because I kind of came to filmmaking from this, from somewhere completely undescribable. But also there's something exciting about kind of reinventing or inventing a film as you go along. Not inventing it from ground up, but once you have the idea, the inspiration to just kind of follow your nose, your knowledge, your encounters that happen while you're preparing it, and then shaping something that out of this chaos that seems to have some kind of interesting order.
Now, film schools really started properly in the 60s, certainly in the States and in Europe. But before that, directors may have gone through apprenticeship programs, and many also were writers. Do you see, since you took a different tact in your development as a filmmaker, do you see was there an advantage in not having studied film properly? But I think you did your degree originally in literature and philosophy in London, and then German literature at Oxford. Is coming at it from that route into film, not by an obvious kind of pathway, was that an advantage in any way?
It's hard to say. I mean, that's how I arrived. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody else. It's got some advantages. Some people benefit from being at film school. It's hard to say. I mean, it definitely is part of me, this kind of roundabout route of getting somewhere. But
yes.
But it's also something to do with the fact that I'm a kind of late developer, slow starter. I was always interested in poetry, in literature, in photography, tried a bit of this, bit of that, had odd jobs. And it was at a certain point, something clicked, and I knew that I wanted to make documentaries, and I didn't quite know what they were, but I fed off reality, and certain things that really interested me, and landscapes and countries that interested me. And then once I found a way of doing it and got to a certain point, I got bored with that. So I moved on to something slightly different, but again with this principle of not quite knowing where you're going to end up, just finding something exciting to get the journey going, and just following my wits. Because this all kind of presupposes that you work in a kind of small budget territory. I don't think I'm at the moment of developing a film with Miramax, and this sort of amateurish approach is not paying dividends so far.
But I mean, as we'll see in a moment in the first clip, one of the things that the critics commented on very early in your career in the early 90s was that you had a very innovative take in filmmaking that didn't easily necessarily marry up with traditional documentary practices. And so perhaps one reason for that is this, that you didn't train as a filmmaker, that you weren't, in a sense, weren't schooled to approach documentary or specific genres of filmmaking in a very set way.
Yes, most likely. And I didn't really know even what documentary was supposed to be doing, to be honest. I mean, there's people making documentaries on television, most of them not very exciting. There's kind of interviews and clips. Then the verite documentaries, most of them I found tiresome, but some were fantastic, of course. But I didn't know the ethos of documentary filmmaking. So when I had the chance to make documentaries for television money, I was relatively fresh. I made some really bad ones first, but then I slowly, worked out what to avoid, just basically you want to get stuff that excites you, that has life on screen and some kind of structure, that is a kind of journey into something. It was very primitive, But
And the first one of those that was certainly successful in the early films that we're going to look at now, a clip from Moscow to Petushki. Can you explain the basis of that and the Russian writer that's the focal point for that film?
yeah, this film is about a Russian novelist, Venedikt Yerofeyev, whose most famous book, Moscow Petushki, was my favorite novel at the time, and still sort of is. I mean, it's a great piece of writing.
But it wasn't published at the time.
No, it wasn't published. It was published in samizdat in Russia.
But it wasn't actually published formally in Russian or even in English.
No.
In fact, he hadn't published at all, had he?
No. No. Somebody smuggled his manuscript to Israel, and it got published in Israel by... He didn't even know it was published in Israel. And then via Israel, it got translated into some... Actually, then it made its way to Poland, and somebody translated it in samizdat in Poland, then it was printed in Polish in London. Complicated life.
But wasn't there a myth that he didn't even exist?
There were rumors that that he was a famous Soviet novelist who was too scared to publish under his own name. Not that it was overtly political what he wrote, but it was a completely anarchic. It was a kind of free-form poetic prose involving ideology, German idealist philosophy. It was full of references to literature, but it was basically about a train journey into delirium tremens of a certain character, the alter ego of the writer, who travels from Moscow to Petushki, a town 120 kilometers outside Moscow, on a suburban train, and the 14 stations towards Petushki, which are concrete stations, which you can retrace, are like 14 stations of the cross, but also 14 stages in intoxication. And he encounters all sorts of characters en route, and it becomes more and more of a kind of allegorical journey, but it never feels like a lifeless didactic allegory. It feels like a totally liberated, freewheeling language experiment.
And I know we're all greatly looking forward to seeing your next works, and it's been a treat for us to talk with you this evening and just see a flavor of the extraordinary works in cinema and documentary film that what I think of as visual poems that you've created, to see something of that during this short session. So I'd just like us all to thank Pawel Pawlikowski. It's been a great pleasure to have you on the direct.
Thank you very much.